Morning, church. I want you to picture with me a couple of different kind of scenes or images. Seems like boats have been on my mind lately, but you can picture, right, a boat out on the water, trying to stay in the same spot as, the waves are coming and crashing along, or the winds are picking up and coming, and that to stay in the same spot, what that boat needs, right, is a deep anchor. An anchor, something to tether it down, to hold it fast. Or if you like plants, which I think a few of you might, you could picture a plant, right, and the winds are picking up and the weather's picking up. Anybody lose any trees? Hopefully no one lost any trees over the past weekend. We had some really big branches come down, but think of what that plant needs, but it needs deep roots, right, to hold fast, to stay fast in that soil. To not be swayed or knocked over by the winds or the rain or the snow that's coming in. Or if you have still been in the world of sheep and shepherding from Amoros's message last week, if you're still picturing ancient Israel and the sheepfolds, you can picture, right, those sheep on the hillside. And what do they need to feel safe and secure? They need a shepherd, right? They need that shepherd that is there with them, that they trust and that they know that guides and protects and watches over them. All of these things, whether it's the anchor or the deep roots that shepherd, they secure, they attach, they keep the tree standing, they keep the boat in place, they keep the sheep where they need to be safe. And this morning, as we are looking, we're going to continue in John chapter 10, verses 11 through 21. We are looking at the reality of the Good Shepherd. And I think what is crucial about this Good Shepherd, if I were to say it more simply, is that he is the one who keeps those sheep safe and secure. And we're going to look really at some of the key components of what does that safety, that security look like? Who does Jesus describe himself to be as he talks about the Good Shepherd? And I think in our lives and in our world, there's a lot that tosses us about, right? There's a lot that pulls us in different directions. Waves that come crashing along, the waves of life, so to speak. And this passage just reminds us that we are a people who are deeply rooted. We are deeply anchored. We are watched over because we have a good shepherd. And so I just want to explore that with you today, what that looks like, to be a people who are really secure, really attached to a good shepherd. And so just as a little bit of background before we dive in, what you'll see, and this will overlap at times with some things Amoros mentioned to us last week as well, that in the Old Testament, shepherds and sheep were a very common way to speak about leaders, both whether that be a human leader or God, right, and their people, and that the care and protection of a shepherd, that care and protection that the shepherd was to give to a flock was an apt way to speak of the care and protection that a king was to provide for his people, or that God provided for his people, as we looked at in Psalm 23. But the prophets of Israel also would use this same shepherding language and the image of shepherds to lament and to call out leadership that had lost its way. And it is this image of failed leadership, the failure of leadership, that might actually be a part of the backdrop of Jesus' message here in John chapter 10. Right after our passage today, so if you look at John 10:22, it mentions that Jesus is speaking at the Feast of Dedication, which is another term for Hanukkah. So they were celebrating, if you think of Hanukkah and you have the menorah with all the lights, which celebrates the rededication of the temple after its desecration by the Greek, the Hellenized rulers in the 160s. If you want to know more, talk to me afterwards. We'll get into an exciting discussion about what all took place there. But it celebrates this rededication of the temple. But what's important about that is that Jesus, in this message around the Good Shepherd, may actually have been a part of what he was speaking there at that same time. It comes before, but Jesus continues these same themes into John chapter 10 further along. And so it's thought that this message might all take place at Hanukkah, the time of this festival of dedication. And One scholar writes that Hanukkah became a season that asked hard questions about failed leadership and false shepherds. During this week, people were likely reading one of the most stirring passages of prophetic critique of Israel's failed leadership, and that's Ezekiel 34. It is both a critique and then a promise. Let me read to you part of Ezekiel 34. It's a powerful passage about shepherds, and think of this as that this is in people's minds as Jesus comes and starts to talk about who he is as the good shepherd, right? This is from Ezekiel 34:1. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourself with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays, or searched for the lost. You have ruled them harshly and brutally, so they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains, and on every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. This is the critique that Ezekiel launches against the leaders. And it is a powerful critique of failed shepherds, right? And Jesus will step in and identify himself as the good shepherd. What does it mean for Jesus to be this good, this model or noble shepherd? I think Jesus is going to identify us for three central things that speak of his good shepherd leadership, and they are his self-giving love, his intimate knowledge that he has of his flock, and his bringing in of all others, of the unity that he creates from many different sheep, from many different places. So he is a shepherd of self-giving love, of intimate knowledge, and one who unifies under his leadership. So we're going to look at each of these three things in turn, and I will read the passage. And so if you have your Bibles, you can open to John chapter 10, verse 11. And let me just read the first several verses there. And he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man who runs away because he is a hired hand, the man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. In this first section, Jesus will contrast himself. As you saw, and as Amherst laid out, there's a series of contrasts going on in this passage. Here, he's going to contrast the good shepherd with the hired hand. Let's look at some of the characters that are mentioned. First, notice that there's a wolf taking place here. The wolf is the one who attacks. He's our predator in the image. In the biblical tradition, this could be Israel's own leaders. They can be compared to wolves who come after their own people. It can also be other leaders, other enemies of the people. And obviously, there's the ultimate predator, the ultimate accuser, the devil himself, who comes after God's people, his flock. And then there's the sheep who are in danger, right, of being injured, killed, and scattered by this wolf. They are the prey, right? And we have a hired hand. He's not the shepherd. He doesn't own the sheep. So what does he do in the face of the predator, in the face of the danger? He abandons them. He runs away. And the result being that if the wolf attacks, the flock is scattered, and as they become scattered, they become more vulnerable to the wolf and to other predators. So the hired hand doesn't care for the sheep. He's paid to look after them, but has no real investment in them, is what Jesus points out. And so when a real threat arises, he's looking after his own back, right? And he runs for safety. But that's contrasted with who Jesus claims to be, the good shepherd, who will lay down his life for the sheep. He owns them, And he's willing to give his life for his sheep to protect them from the wolf. And what is striking, I think, about the language that Jesus uses is he does not simply focus on the fact that the good shepherd risks his life for the flock, right? We see this, right? Think of David, Old Testament David, fighting off lions and bears from the flock. And other shepherds, he doesn't just mention that he was going to stand in front of the danger, risk his life, but he says 5 times in this passage, from verse 11 to 21, 5 times, it mentions that he lays down his life for his flock. He will state this again in verse 15, and then he returns to the topic at the end of this passage in verses 17 and 18, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Clearly, the shepherd's willingness to die for his sheep is a really central theme that we are coming across here. And Tim Laniak, who writes on the shepherding image across Scripture, this shepherding theme, he notes, in speaking about this passage, that the emphasis now turns to the truly innovative motif in gospel shepherd traditions, the shepherd's intention to die for his sheep, right? Risking one's life was occasionally necessary as an expression of protection, which we talked about. Whoever deliberately dying for one's flock, he says, pushes the metaphor to or kind of beyond its limit, right? The contrast between Jesus and others, right, the thieves, the robbers, and the hirelings and wolves, is drawn sharply. Life for the predator entails death for the flock. If the wolf is able to live, the sheep get scattered and attacked and killed. Life for the flock, Jesus says, requires the death of the shepherd. It is now clear that the shepherd in John's gospel is also a sacrificial lamb. And I didn't prepare Carol to say that this morning. But the good shepherd, right, who gives his life for the flock, is the sacrificial lamb. He's blending these realities together. It's the shepherd who becomes the lamb, who gives his own blood to save and redeem all those who trust in him. As John the Baptist declares at the start of the gospel, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Notice what else Jesus says about laying down his life in verses 17 and 18. Just reading those verses. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. The command I received from my Father. This command I received from my Father. There's a lot of important stuff in there. But notice that Jesus' sacrificial love is made by his own choice and his own agency. The Good Shepherd is not a victim. He's not being compelled by another, but he is willingly, repeatedly it says, he willingly lays down his life to save the life of his flock. Jesus also points the listeners beyond his death at this point to his resurrection life. He both lays down and he takes up his life. Death, he declares, is not the final word for the shepherd or the lamb. Thus we have the hirelings, right, who seek to save their own life and abandon the flock to death, compared to the good shepherd who willingly lays down his life to save the flock and then takes up his life again, to lead them once more in his resurrection power. Reminds us of Jesus' words, right? That to give up our lives is to really gain our lives. And so, just as we think about the significance of the reality of this, I think just want to remind us that we are a people who are sacrificially loved. We are loved by a shepherd, a God who would willingly give up his own life so that we might have life with him. The author of life, the creator of life, would face the ravages of death, right? The Holy One, Jesus being very God, who he in himself, right, is faithfulness. He is wholeness and goodness. He is shalom and peace. He would take on the full weight of our brokenness, our sin, and our rebellion, and suffer those consequences, right? Death, in order to free us, to set us free, to protect and to save and redeem his flock. And so as we are at this first Sunday of Lent, I just want to invite you to sit with this truth for a while this week. I know sometimes we hear the gospel, right? Many times we hear these words, and it can be easy to sort of kind of let it bounce off at times, right? But just invite you to let it sink in for a moment. We're people, each one of you, are personally and deeply and sacrificially loved. You are loved. The Good Shepherd, Jesus declares again and again in this passage, says, I give my life for you. You are loved. And as a people, right, if we are people who are secured in deep love of God, what does that look like? How does that impact the way that we live out our lives from day to day? As we sit with this truth, Doreen reminded us that we're beloved dust. Part of it, I think, is that we're invited to sit in that truth, just as you enjoy the love of a friend or a spouse or a child, right? Sometimes you just sit and you enjoy the fact that you have that relationship. You just enjoy it, and you can soak in it for a while, right? And then you might want to live into this truth, right? Which will look a little different for each of us. But if you would complete this sentence, since I am deeply and sacrificially loved, I can fill in the blank, right? What does that invite me to do if I know who I am? If I know that secure anchor or those deep roots, or the shepherd that's there in front of me? It might be that I can rest, right? I could rest from worry. I can slow down. Maybe I can live out this truth. How can we model it to others? How can we be those small examples? We're not Jesus. We're not trying to save people. But how can we be those small examples of sacrificial love in tangible ways? Maybe you let somebody go ahead of you in the grocery store just to practice slowing down and letting someone else get ahead. Those are small things, but don't underlook the small ways, the ways we train our muscles to love, right? To care, to show that it's not just about myself, but to focus on others. Because we are loved. And not only does Jesus declare that he is the shepherd who lays down his life for us, but also look at how he describes how he knows the sheep. So just continuing in verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Again, this is a pretty amazing declaration. Jesus compares the way he knows his sheep, that being us, right, to the knowing that takes place between the Father and the Son. Think about that for a second. The way that Jesus, God the Father and God the Son know each other, which they've known each other from eternity past, you can't get your minds around it, right? They are one, we declare, is the way that he knows us and the way that we can know him. This is not some abstract knowing like how I can know an arithmetic problem, or it's not like knowing, if you show me a picture of the Statue of Liberty, I can say, yeah, I know what that is, right? I can recognize it. It's a much deeper knowing. It's a knowing we've already been talking about this morning, the deep relational knowing that comes from being with someone else. Jesus says, these are my sheep. Those are words of relationship. They are words of connection. They are words of covenant that we talked about. He knows all those who have entered into his sheepfold, right? We talked last week about he was the gate. To come through him, right, you become his sheep. And we are in relationship with him. And if you think of it this way, if you've ever worked with animals, I'm going to look at a few of you, right? You all know that they're different. Animals are not the same. They look different, and they have different personalities and different quirks. So if I don't know, when we're milking, right, there were always the cows that came down first. There were always the cows that would like to come in last. There were ones that were sort of the boss of the group. And you integrate new ones, and they have to get along with the bossy ones. And, animals just have different quirks and personalities, just like we do, right? And think of a shepherd, right, who probably helped give birth to each little lamb, walked with it all the years of its growing up. And Jesus says, I know my sheep. He's talking about knowing them, from their day one to whatever day they're currently out, right? He knows them, he knows their personalities, he knows which ones don't want to leave the grazing pasture and which ones come quickly and all those sorts of things, right? And that's how he knows us. He knows just all the little things about us. And so he also says that we can know him. Just as animals often know who is taking care of them and will respond differently at times. So sometimes, on the farm, we'd have different people would bring the cows down from the barns to the milking area. And some people were very calm and quiet about doing that. Other people were very loud. And, the animals would be in a different state depending on who was bringing them down from the barns. I'll let you guess which way I like to bring the cows down. But anyway, so Jesus declares, right, that he is the good shepherd and he knows us. We are his, we are known. We're people who are not only deeply loved, but deeply known. And we are invited into that relationship. So, this is an actual question, not asking you to respond right now. But, do you feel that God knows you? Do you feel that others know you? And, I think all of us, relationships are a journey. They take time, they take commitment, intentionality. And so, again, there's invitation, I think of Lent and a time to simply be with God, to talk with him, to get to know him through his word, to listen for his voice. Listened to that voice of God. Is it? Sometimes I think, I was struck by a podcast that I was listening to that talked about, how do you know if it's God speaking to you at times? So one of the things you can do is listen for the tenor and tone of that voice. Is that voice coming at you in an accusatory way? Or is that voice that, when you're listening, I don't know if anyone else does, the voice in your head sometimes, is it accusatory or is it kind? Remember that the adversary is the accuser. That is what he is described as. So if that voice is coming at you in accusation, it's not the voice of God, right? The voice of God is kind. It is deeply kind. It will speak truth to us that can convict us, but it will speak it in ways that are kind, in ways that draw us, like the prodigal son back home, that invite us to turn from what we're doing and come home, right? So just, as you think and reflect and listen, notice when that voice is accusing you, and tell that one to be quiet. But listen to the one that speaks words of life to you, whether those be true and hard words, but invite you to turn, to come, to sit with him, to repent, or to simply know his love. The invitation also, of course, I think, is to know others, that as we model that the shepherd invites us to live like him, right? Not be him, but to reflect him. So look around the room. Who here do you not know their whole story, right? Are there people here who you just haven't really gotten to know yet? Or maybe you know them pretty well, but it's been a while since you caught up. I just invite you to use this season as a time to continue to know one another. I know many of you have lived many, many years together in community, but there's always opportunities. There's always things that maybe you haven't gotten the chance yet to talk about, or maybe you haven't gotten yet to share with someone. This is an invitation, I think, to just go deeper into knowing one another, and to authenticity, into an invitation just to be known, and to know that that is how God knows us. So we are loved and we are known. And lastly, the third feature, I think, of the Good Shepherd is that he is for all people. So look, Jesus almost has like a little bit of an aside in the middle of this message. Some have described it that way. And he says, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. Here again, Jesus seems to push the boundaries of the image, right, of the metaphor. Shepherds, they had their sheep. And Jesus now indicates that he has sheep outside of his flock, outside of his sheep pen. And he's telling this to his audience, the Jewish audience. They're likely gathered at the festival of dedication at Hanukkah. And it seems clear that the sheep pen are the Jewish people, right, who he come and is He is Jewish, and he is speaking to and ministering among, and Jesus indicates that there are sheep beyond this pen, the Gentiles, right? Jesus is stressing here that his sheep come from a multitude of peoples. The good shepherd is the one who gathers from all peoples. He gathers the lost and the strays and the abandoned. And what's important, right, is it is all those who listen to his voice, those who follow him, right, who recognize his voice, as we talked about last week. It is the following of the same shepherd that creates one flock. One shepherd equals one flock. And so as we think about our world today, and it feels like it is becoming in ways increasingly polarized or divided into different tribes, politically or otherwise, I think Jesus' words continue to challenge us and invite us. When we follow the same shepherd, he is what unites us. He brings us into one flock. And it's hard to underestimate how difficult this actually was for the early church to get figured out, right? The work of bringing Jewish followers of Jesus and Gentile followers of Jesus together was hard work. And a lot of the New Testament is focused on the difficulty of what that looked like and how the Spirit of God guided them in that process and brought them together. And it's still hard work. It's hard to sometimes be with people who are different. Maybe that's just me. But Jesus invites us and reminds us that he is our one shepherd and he creates one flock among his people. And so, just two invitations. As the good shepherd, he recognizes that Jesus says he must bring in others. And I think so there's just that call to reach out, right? To model that Jesus says, I'm bringing other sheep. We model our good shepherd when we invite others, right? To know Jesus, to be a part of his sheep, or to be a part of his people, his community, to come to him. And it's just a reminder that across our differences, that we are united by Jesus. We are one shepherd. We have one shepherd, and he makes a flock, right? So, is there someone that you might be prompted to reach out to, just to continue to share, maybe just to continue to get to know, just to continue to love that Jesus might be laying on your heart? Is there someone you have differences with that you might need a gentle reminder that we are one flock, that we are brothers and sisters together? I think in all these ways, we just find such a secure roots, right? A secure tether to our boat or anchor, or just as sheep, we are so safe, right? In a world that can seem turbulent, whether you want to be on the waves, or you want to be a tree, or you want to be a sheep, pick your image, right? But Jesus just reminds us in this passage, I think, of just how rooted and secure we are because we are loved and because we are known and because we are united in him. And interestingly, I just look at the words that end our passage. The Jews who heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, these are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Jesus continued to confuse people and invite people to see who he was, right? And that is okay. People will be confused, and people will not always accept the message that Jesus brings. And that grieves us, but we see the reality that when Jesus was here, not all people accepted him. But there's still the call to be those people who invite others to know him, for ourselves to be deeply rooted and known by him. Because he's the good shepherd, right, who loves us sacrificially, who knows us intimately, who unites us under his leadership. And so as his sheep, we are loved, and we are known, and we are united. And today we have the opportunity, we're going to take communion together, and really communion, I didn't try to plan this out in any particular way, but it seems that it embodies the reality of what Jesus declares to us, right? It is, I think in so many ways, the reality that he invites us to his table, right? And we remember the sacrificial lamb. We remember our good shepherd, that he is the lamb, also who sacrificed himself for us. we are partaking of the elements of a meal, reminding us that we are in communion with our shepherd and with this lamb. And it reminds us that it is for all who have placed their faith in Jesus, right? It unites us. We are united in a common symbol and ritual of a meal, and it is part of what sustains us as a community together. And so